Good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure to bring us to attention. My name's Jeff Garrett. I'm the Chief Executive of the US Study Center, and I'll introduce our conference in a moment, but my opening duty, which is also a pleasure, is to introduce Songwoman Maruchi of the Turrbal people to do a traditional welcome to country for us. Songwoman.
Balundiko, Kundunumbuler, Yang Indai, Yango, Kundai, Yango, Balundiko, Kundunumbuler, Balundiko, Kundunumbuler, Balundiko, Kundunumbuler, Balundiko, Kundunumbuler, Yang Indai, Yango, Kundai, Yango, Balundiko, Kundunumbuler, Balundiko, Kundunumbuler. Bulkari Marumba Mianjanu. That's welcome to Brisbane in the language of the Turrbal people. I stand here representing my 90-year-old mother, who's the oldest of the Turrbal people, as well as the Gubbi Gubbi people of the Sunshine Coast. The Turrbals were documented as being extinct back in 1861, and one small family survived the impact of European settlement upon our ancestral homelands. We are also the direct bloodline descendants of a man that was nicknamed the Duke of York back in the 1820s, 1830s, 1840s, up into the mid-1850s. He was documented as being chief of the old Brisbane tribe. That name, Duke York, actually anglicised from Dakiyaga in our language, which means the healer, or the person who works with healing. And some of you may have heard of hard yakka. The name yakka actually comes from our language, means hard work when you see the ad on the television. So hope everything goes well for this gathering, and I'd generally like to extend an appreciation for people who have general gatherings upon our ancestral homelands, who generally ask us along to do a welcome to country ceremony, because that's the way we did it for thousands of years, and gradually it's becoming more and more common in modern day Australian activities. So just want to let you know, thanks for inviting us. It just gives us an opportunity to share our experience with the broader community, whether it be domestic or global. So hope everything goes well. So I'll do the blessing, and that song I was singing is Brisbane River Dreaming. Balandigo, Gundulumbule, Balandigo, Gundulumbule. Thanks.
It would have been extraordinarily difficult for me to follow such an inspirational performance. I want to thank the Queensland Parliament for at least giving me a break in the action, so maybe I could seem more interesting than at least part of the program. As I said before, it's a real pleasure for me to be here this morning. I am the Chief Executive of the US Study Centre, which is located at the University of Sydney. But this event, I hope, gives some indication of the centre's reach. We are really a two-part organisation. The first part is relatively traditional academic. I like to say in American parlance that we now have a soup-to-nuts academic operation going all the way from a pre-university entrance for high school students, undergraduates, master's students, PhD students, and postdoctoral fellows. But in addition to the academic program at the centre, our second arm really is to be a think tank. And what we hope to do in our think tank is to focus on a small range of issues where American and Australian experiences can productively be shared. Today's event is part of a significant push that we've made broadly in the sustainability area, and I think it's probably apparent more to everybody in this room than to me that sustainability challenges are great in the US and in Australia. Urban challenges are great in the US and Australia, and therefore bringing them together, both bringing the issues together and bringing people from both sides of the Pacific together, is wholly consistent with the centre's mission. The second thing I'd say about the centre is that we also like, wherever possible, to work with the broadest range of stakeholders. So today we have people in the room, not only from the US and Australia, but also from business, government, academia, the non-profit sector. Sometimes people argue that universities are a bit of an ivory tower. It always strikes me that that the notion that rigor and relevance might be different is a false dichotomy. It probably is a very good idea to bring rigor to issues that are highly relevant, and it seems to me that that's what our event today will endeavour to do. We certainly couldn't do it on our own. The centre is very fortunate to have some wonderful corporate partners for today's event, and more generally in our sustainability initiative. I would like to thank the Dow Chemical Company, Alcoa, Lend-Lease and UDIA for their support of today's event, without which literally it would not be possible. The last thing I wanted to say about the centre, and this will lead to my ceding the podium, is that even though the US Study Centre is located in Sydney, we take very seriously the notion that the centre should be a national centre. And I've always thought that if we were going to do things outside Sydney, the best way to do them would be to identify and then work with partner organisations in other states. In this case, we're incredibly privileged to have both the University of Queensland and its Global Change Institute as our partners in this two-day event on the City of the Future. And it's my pleasure to welcome and to thank Paul Greenfield, the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Queensland, not only for being here this morning, but for his support from the beginning of this project. Paul?
Thank you, Jeff. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Turrbal and Jagera peoples, and pay my respects to elders past and present. The Honourable Kate Jones, MP, Minister for Climate Change and Sustainability, Professor Jeff Garrett, CEO of the US Study Centre, distinguished guests one and all, and in particular those who have come from a long distance from the US. You've probably been up for about 6 or 7 hours already, so the day is well underway. Well, welcome to this conference, Cities of the Future. The Global Change Institute and the University of Queensland are delighted to be partnering with the US Studies Centre The Global Change Institute is a relatively new institute at the University of Queensland and was created to allow us to integrate across the university, across its various disciplines and resources, and to partner with groups outside to tackle complex problems, basically. And of course, today's falls into that. And I would like to thank Robert Hill, Jeff Garrett, Ove Ho Gulberg, and the various others who brought about this partnership. I mean, I would just echo Jeff's comments. It's because we have many of the same objectives. Cities of the future. That's quite the challenge. What do we know? Somewhere in the 2008-2009 period, more than 50% of the world's population lived in large urban cities. For the first time ever, we crossed the threshold of more than half the world's population living in what we might call cities. It's not going to go backwards. The predictions are that it will be 70% before too many decades are passed. There's an interesting book by a Canadian author called Jeb Brugman, called The Urban Revolution, where he looked at a number of major cities around the world, which are quite diverse, everything from Detroit to Mumbai to smaller cities. And of course, in his assessment, some of them worked and some of them didn't work, and I put worked in inverted commas. Mumbai was most interesting because, as with other commentators, he'd reached the conclusion by talking to a lot of people in the Mumbai slums that that was actually a viable city. It worked socially, it worked economically, had a few problems on the health sphere, but it worked as a living, coherent entity. And why? Because the density of individuals increased the opportunity set socially, economically, in a network sense, in all the ways that you can imagine, and it actually worked. Now, as I said, I put worked in inverted commas because clearly there are many stories of individuals there. But he came to an assessment that, and others have done that subsequently. There's been recent television assessment or television presentations of an assessment of the Dharavi slum, which came to much the same conclusions. And of course, that's a bit challenging in some senses to our Western concept of cities. But why does it work? And as I said, I think it's because by concentrating people, you increase the opportunity set. But with that, if you increase the opportunity set, you've also increased the risk. So the risk goes up as the opportunity set goes up. In fact, in general, that's generally true in almost any endeavour. So a modern high-tech city of today or tomorrow is going to be dependent almost on external sources for energy, for water, for food. And the question is, to what extent? Something's going to have to cross that boundary. The likelihood that a major 5, 10 million, 2 million entity can be totally internally dependent on energy, water, food is so far beyond where we are now as to be improbable. But that's not to say it can't become partially so. So the question then is, how does it do that? Should it do that? Is that the best option? Finally, let me, in terms of your discussion, because there are many people here who know a lot more about planning, urban design than I do. But I must say, I find the popular debate about urban shape, urban planning, fairly uninspiring. It seems to me a lot of it is based on what I would call religion. That is, you hold extreme views. The market will always work. Market will solve the whole problem. That's one. The second one is the small is better than large. A totally unproven statement. It may be correct under some circumstances, but it's held as a religious belief. Decentralised is better than centralised. Is that true? I think sometimes it may be. Cars are universally bad. Is that true? In other words, I would challenge that the empirical evidence on many of these statements is absolutely woeful. It just doesn't exist. However, I mean, to be fair, it is a bit hard to carry out experiments at the urban scale, although it's clear that some societies have done that, whether they intended to do it or not. So it's very important, I think, to share the experiences that we have, the visions that we have of the future, have them tested, have them challenged, because that is really the only way we're going to go forward, is basically to have many of our current thought patterns, I think, challenged significantly. And I see this is the role, I think, that both the institutions wish to bring about here by bringing experience from the United States, from Australia, from practitioners in government, from practitioners in the private sector, from the research sector, to really throw that into the mix and then look at cities of the future. So, unfortunately, I have to do a couple of other things today. I would much prefer to be staying here and listening and participating in your debate, but I will only be able to catch a little bit of it. So I wish you well. Thank you again for all of you who have travelled long distances, and that could be within Australia too. It is possible to travel long distances within Australia. And I wish you well for the conference. Thank you. And it's now my pleasure to introduce the Honourable Kate Jones MP, who's the Minister for Climate Change and Sustainability. I don't think she has all planning and all transport and all energy and all water under her, but the climate change and sustainability impacts on all of those areas, and I look forward to hearing from Kate.
Thank you very much, Paul. I don't now, but I would like them as a climate change minister. No, that's not a push for a promotion. Look, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land in which we gather here this morning, the Turrbal and Jagera people, and pay respects to their elders, both past and present. We've got a pretty extended acknowledgements list. We've got Jeff Garrett, of course, the Chief Executive Officer of the United States Study Centre at University of Sydney, Paul Greenfield, Vice-Chancellor of the University of Queensland, who put quite a few questions to all of us in this room, Polly Trottenberg, the United States Assistant Secretary of Transport, Raphael Bostic, Assistant Secretary for Policy Development and Research, United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, Councillor Robert Doyle, the Lord Mayor of Melbourne, Robert Hill, Adjunct Professor in Sustainability, US Studies Centre, and Chairman of the Australian Carbon Trust, and of course the organiser in helping today's event, and Megan Houghton, the CEO of CitySmart here in Brisbane. And I really do, as the Climate Change Minister here in Queensland, want to take this opportunity for welcoming you here to our state and of course to our capital. And we'd like to, there's a number of reasons why I think it is important to hold it here in Queensland, apart from the wonderful partnership you have with the universities here in Queensland, but it's also timely. Brisbane is the fastest growing state. Brisbane is the fastest growing city of any city, capital city in Australia. We're looking to double our population in the next 50 years. And when you're from a large American city, it might seem small, but we are now got over 4 million people, and we will continue to see that grow. We're growing at around 2,000 people per week. Another reason why you might be here is our beautiful weather, which we are putting on well for you today, but it might be because we're also the highest emitters of carbon in Australia and in the world here in Queensland. So we have a number of challenges in our state, but one that I think I agree with Paul, we've got to change the way that we think and put new questions to ourselves, but I think that we are trying to face these challenges as a state. And one of the most important things that we have done at a state level to do this is we, for a long time now, have been focusing on getting our planning right. And as we said before, growth brings with it huge opportunities, but huge challenges and huge risks, not only for planners and leaders like yourself in the room, but also for us politicians as well. People are particularly close and connected to their cities. They feel an emotional connection to a city. So it is a challenge, but one that we can't shy away from and one that we need to confront head on. Through this, the Premier, who unfortunately could not be here today and passes her apologies but wishes you the best over today and tomorrow. I'm in the same boat as Paul. I'd much rather be here for the next 2 days, but I've got to go to Cabinet, of course. But this is something that we are very focused on, and we had a major growth conference in Brisbane at the beginning of this year, and out of that we established the Growth Management Queensland, and it has 6 key areas that we are focusing on going forward, which is of course shaping our future. What does the city of Brisbane City of the future look like, strengthening our regions. Queensland, even though our capital city is growing at such a rapid rate, what most people that aren't from Queensland don't understand is that we are the most decentralised state in Australia, with more people living outside the capital city than in it. But I think the prediction is that this will also change even in a state like ours, where we still have quite a large agricultural sector. It's focusing on promoting livable and sustainable communities through the way that we change our planning and delivering infrastructure, and of course protecting our lifestyle and our environment. One of the key planning tools that we have done to achieve this is the South East Queensland Regional Plan. Anyone from Queensland, once again, would be very familiar with this, but the federal government has highlighted that our regional plan in this region of Australia is probably the blueprint for how we would like to see planning across the country. What's, particularly as the Environment Minister, I'm passionate about is this actually restricts or provides growth, the urban footprint, to be around 20% of this region, with 80% falling outside, protecting our particularly areas where it affects our waterways and also our other environment which is there, which also means that our city is more livable and sustainable. So there is a key focus in not only directing urban development but also protecting our biodiversity. And there's a number of actions that we've also been taking to ensure that what we do build is sustainable. All of you would know that our built environment is one of the large contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, and in Queensland it's around 15%. And so we've done a number of things in regards to our building code here to try to change that. We've been strengthening water-saving codes for homes and commercial buildings, providing sub-metering codes and grey water reuse. We've been leading the charge in regards to energy efficiency, with 6-star energy equivalent ratings for homes being a minimum standard, and also 5-star for new multi-unit developments as well. We're also, given that there are new challenges where you do increase intensity in cities, we're also moving to an introduction of external noise codes to help to reduce that impact as well. And another policy which is the first of its kind in Australia, but one that does deal with the challenges of having a concentration of urban design, is ban the builders. And this is the first policy, as I said, in Australia to stop body corporates and developers from banning specific energy efficient and affordable building features. So this is a way of ensuring that we are looking at all the barriers that might lead to development not being as sustainable as it could or should be. Part of this also, which wasn't without controversy, but we introduced sustainability declarations. So that's when you sell a home, you have to list your sustainable features, and so people have a much better understanding of what they're purchasing and how to operate their home. I think this is a good one, because one of the sayings that I've heard since being the Environment Minister here is that, you know, when you make a major purchase, whether that's a car or a new stereo, you get a user's manual. You don't get one when you buy a home, yet this is a place where you probably expend most of your water and your energy, and those are the things that we need to curb as a state government. Into the future, we are embarking on quite a significant infrastructure spend. Some people, particularly if you're from New York, would take for granted a really good rail system. Brisbane is a city that grew off the back of the motor car, so a lot of our outer suburbs were built sort of post the 1970s, 80s, and in the 90s itself. So we're currently investing over $1.4 billion in building a new rail system. So for the first time, we'll see a network of rail lines underground, and this will be 18 kilometres of new rail line, and we'll be linking all of our major hubs, so not only the city but also major sporting infrastructure and new hospitals where most journeys occur. This is a big investment, but one that we think is crucial to building Brisbane's future and ensuring that we are changing the way that we move around in transport. And I take up Paul Greenfield's point about is all passenger vehicle use damaging or wrong? And I think that as a state government, and particularly as the Minister for Climate Change, I've been really focusing on developing a new electric vehicles policy, which I'll be releasing soon, to say what are the levers that we have at a state level to encourage this kind of a change in driving and reduce emissions through driving using obviously renewable energy. And I'm really looking forward to releasing this paper. But once again, I think this also shows that we as a state government are making the investments that needed to attract new industries to our city. But of course, This, like the rail system, is once again a large investment in infrastructure, and that comes with challenges here in Queensland because 80% of Queenslanders live on the coastline, and all of the science, as everyone in this room understands, points to the fact that we're going to see significant sea level rise as a consequence of climate change and, of course, inundation. So once again, we are planning for this and I'll be releasing a new coastal plan to have a look at that. But that goes to the heart of what we should allow to build and where. And that's why I think having a conference like this here in Brisbane and in Queensland not only makes smart sense for the people that have come from the United States, but also for us to listen to some of the things that you're adopting overseas that we can actually put into our planning framework and ensure that the investment we are making is smart and does lead to cities that can cope with the challenges that all of us face going forward. So with those few words, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all here to Queensland. I look forward to hearing the outcomes of the conference and also receiving some of the papers so we can learn these lessons. Thank you very much. Please enjoy your next 2 days.
Ray Wills from the Sustainable Energy Association of Australia. I appreciate you're not the Energy Minister, but in site tours yesterday we're seeing greenfield sites where sustainability is being built in but renewable energy is not being built in necessarily. I'm wondering if you might like to comment on how you see greenfield sites being developed with renewable energy.
Well, I think that's a really good point, and I know that it's one that our government is currently tackling with. I kind of made a joke at the beginning as the climate change minister, as Paul said, you'd actually want to be the Minister for Planning, the Minister for Energy and the Minister for Transport, and life would be a lot easier. But look, what I did was remiss in talking about in my opening remarks is that particularly the Premier and Bligh has a real focus on building our renewable energy here in Queensland. In the absence of a CPRS here in Australia, it hasn't had probably the investment in renewable energy in regards to getting a commercial gain hasn't been there as much as one would like as a trigger. But we are looking to double our solar investment in Queensland in the next 5 years, and we've been doing that. I think this year we're committing a record $115 million as a state government to ensure that we are once again looking at the levers that we can pull and trying to change the market in that regard. And I'll get to planning in 1 second. So one thing we have been doing is phasing out, because when you look at a home, when you look at the profile of emissions in a home, 30% is heating your water. So for us as a state government, we looked at, well, what can we do to reduce emissions? And that is to phase out the old electric heating of water. So in planning, we already have built in that once your electric water goes bust, you need to replace that with either gas or solar or renewable energy, but they're the two technologies at the moment. And to that end, we've actually introduced a solar rebate scheme to provide financial benefit to those that want to invest in solar, so the transition is costly, and particularly we provided an extra subsidy for pensioners and low-income earners as well. Yes, it is a good idea. We've taken steps in regards to the heating of water, which is about 30%, but I agree with you that we could be building in more, and be happy to tell my Planning Minister and the Energy Minister at Cabinet after this.
Could I ask you, Minister, then just take advantage of one thing you said, which I think maybe some of our American colleagues would be interested in. I think you said that Queensland's the highest per capita carbon emitter in the world. Could you explain that, and does that give you leadership on? Is it just a challenge, or does it provide leadership opportunities for you?
Of course it provides leadership opportunities. Look, it is a challenge, and I've got to say you're right. When I went to Copenhagen last year, and whenever I met an American, they were so happy when I said that statistic. But it is because our community and Queensland has, particularly our electricity generation, has been based on coal. Our argument would be that it's very good quality, high quality coal, which reduces less emissions during generation, but it is a major transition for the Queensland economy, and that is why you will be seeing a really major focus in expanding our gas sector. This, once again, is not without controversy, because we're seeing mining or a new industry encroaching on other land uses that have been there for a long time. So it's a challenge for us as a government. But when you look that strong statistic about what our emissions profile it is, and transitioning to gas is the biggest and shortest way that we can make a significant change in our emissions profile. And of course, investing in new renewable energy. We've done renewable energy mapping across Queensland to have a look at what kind we should invest in. Undoubtedly, solar is the one that makes sense for us. And as we see both in Germany and China, where there's a major investment in technology, we'll continue to see, I think, our solar expansion grow, and I think we will be able to get to the 50% increase in the next 5 years.
Thank you very much. Let me just say one other thing, again, for our American guests. You might think of Australia as a place that exports a lot of coal and iron ore, but there are predictions that say in the next 10 years, Australia will not only be the largest exporter in the world of natural gas, but natural gas will be Australia's largest export. And Queensland and WA are driving the world in new approaches to LNG. The witching hour has arrived for the Minister. I welcome everyone in the audience as joining me in thanking the Minister for her time here this morning.
Thank you very much. Can I just say one thing?
Oh, you want to say you...
I just saw Professor
Bonus time for us.
Thank you, and I'm running late. I saw Professor Ove in the area. When we talk about why it's so important to protect, to reduce our emissions in Queensland, what I think is most, crystallise it in people's mind is that we are home to the Great Barrier Reef, the world's largest reef. Not only is that important from a biodiversity standstill, but it creates about $6 billion in our economy. And so I'm remiss, I'll say that for you, Professor, that is also, as an Environment Minister, when I get up every morning, what am I striving to do? Reduce our emissions and protect the Great Barrier Reef. So I'm ashamed you didn't get there during your couple of days' stay. But thank you very much.
It is true that in the winter there's never an American visitor to the US Study Centre who does not make sure they get to the Barrier Reef when they're in Australia.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure to bring us to attention. My name's Jeff Garrett. I'm the Chief Executive of the US Study Centre, and I'll introduce our conference in a moment, but my opening duty, which is also a pleasure, is to introduce Songwoman Maruchi of the Turrbal people to do a traditional welcome to country for us. Songwoman.
Balundiko, Kundunumbuler, Yang Indai, Yango, Kundai, Yango, Balundiko, Kundunumbuler, Balundiko, Kundunumbuler, Balundiko, Kundunumbuler, Balundiko, Kundunumbuler, Yang Indai, Yango, Kundai, Yango, Balundiko, Kundunumbuler, Balundiko, Kundunumbuler, Bulkari Marumba Mianjanu. That's welcome to Brisbane in the language of the Turrbal people. I stand here representing my 90-year-old mother, who's the oldest of of the Turrbal people as well as the Gubbi Gubbi people of the Sunshine Coast. The Turrbals were documented as being extinct back in 1861, and one for small family survived the impact of European settlement upon our ancestral homelands. We are also the direct bloodline descendant of a man that was nicknamed the Duke of York back in the 1820s, 1830s, global. So hope everything goes well. So I'll do the blessing, and that song I was singing is Brisbane River Dreaming. Up into the mid-1850s. He was documented as being chief of the old Brisbane tribe. That name, Duke York, actually anglicised from Duckiyaga in our language, which means the healer, or the person who works with healing. And some of you may have heard of hard yakka. The name yakka actually comes from our language, means hard work when you see the ad on the television. So hope everything goes well for this gathering, and I'd generally like to extend an appreciation for people who have general gatherings upon our ancestral homelands, who generally ask us along to do a Welcome to Country ceremony, because that's the way we did it for thousands of years, and gradually it's becoming more and more common in modern day Australian activities. So just want to let you know, thanks for inviting us. It just gives us an opportunity to share our experience with the broader community, whether it be domestic or global.